Millionaire ignores his pregnant wife for 7 years, but when a rival sends her flowers, he goes crazy. Imagine a towering mansion on the outskirts of a glittering city where luxury is measured in chandeliers and manicured gardens. Within those marble walls lives a young wife, once brimming with hope but now a prisoner of her husband's cold ambition. 7 years ago, she was newly pregnant and desperate for a sliver of affection. Yet her millionaire husband, consumed by power, refused to see the miracle growing inside her. While she toiled in lonely silence, he built an empire. But everything changes when a mysterious rival sends her flowers, sparking a ruthless jealousy that shatters the carefully polished facade of their marriage. Get ready for betrayal, heartbreak, and high-stakes drama. Helen Lockhart never imagined her life would turn into a stage play of polite smiles and veiled disappointments. Growing up in a modest suburb of Boston, she had big dreams, ones that involved painting on open terraces in Europe or working at a local art gallery. Instead, at 21, she found herself married to Adam Blackwood, a charismatic millionaire known for his ruthless business tactics. Their union was arranged by Helen's father, Michael Lockhart, who was under mounting financial pressures and saw Adam's proposal as a lifeline. The wedding took place under the vaulting arches of St. Cecilia's Cathedral. It was a grand affair, society elites in glittering gowns, paparazzi jostling outside for photos, and Helen feeling trapped beneath a cathedral veil that felt heavier than the world itself. Adam was tall, broad-shouldered, and undeniably handsome, wearing a practiced smile that never quite reached his piercing dark eyes. At first, Helen attempted to convince herself that a marriage of convenience could transform into a partnership of love. Adam seemed promising in the early weeks. He showered her with gifts, introduced her to high-profile acquaintances, and even indulged her love of art by visiting local galleries. In those fleeting moments, Helen believed there was a spark of genuine tenderness buried beneath his ambition. She told herself that once he understood she was pregnant, his paternal instincts would bloom and they would forge a real family. Her hopes took root during a winter evening, a mere 3 months into the marriage, when Helen discovered she was carrying Adam's child. She was nervous but also exhilarated, imagining the moment of revelation. She pictured Adam's stoic face lighting up with wonder, his strong arms embracing her. Instead, she was met with silence. She had chosen a quiet corner of the Blackwood mansion's ornate study, its mahogany shelves stacked with biographies of magnates and gold-embossed law books, to break the news. Adam's initial expression was vacant. After processing her words, he tapped at his phone screen, sending off a quick text before turning back to her. "We'll sort it out," he said coldly. "I'll put you on the best healthcare plan and get a nanny when it's born." That was it. No smile, no excitement, nothing. Helen left the study with her heart in her throat. She spent that night awake in a bed that seemed too large, feeling lonelier than she ever had. She clutched her belly protectively, whispering, "You have me. I'll always love you," to the unborn child within. Over the next few weeks, Adam became increasingly absent. Meetings in Hong Kong, conferences in Dubai, late-night strategy sessions with his board members, his schedule overflowed with priorities that didn't include her. Helen attended prenatal appointments alone. She emailed him ultrasound pictures, which received only perfunctory replies. "Thanks. Busy. We'll talk soon," yet soon never came. In the mansion's silent corridors, the staff treated her politely but maintained a distance, sensing she was not the adored trophy wife they might have expected. Once, an older maid named Maria slipped Helen a cup of chamomile tea and said softly, "Take care of yourself, dear." That small gesture of kindness brought Helen to tears later that night. All the while, Michael Lockhart gloated over how his daughter's marriage had stabilized the Lockhart finances. He rarely asked how Helen was coping, confident that monetary security was compensation enough for any emotional hardship. Meanwhile, Adam's wealth ballooned, bolstered by his single-minded focus on dominating every market he entered: real estate, tech startups, even film production. Yet for Helen, every triumphant headline about Adam's empire was another reminder that the father of her child was more devoted to power than to his own family. She kept telling herself things might change once the baby arrived. She whispered silent prayers that Adam would cradle their child and finally understand what was truly important. But deep down, an ache festered, a worry that perhaps she and her baby would never be more than a footnote in Adam Blackwood's grand designs. Little did she know, her lonely days were about to stretch into years, forging a story laced with heartbreak, unexpected friendships, and an explosive clash that would begin with the simple gift of flowers. The months leading up to Helen's delivery were filled with routine checkups, strict diets, and a mounting sense of resignation. She made a small circle of friends through her prenatal yoga class in downtown Boston, women who were thrilled to share pregnancy milestones. Their conversations dripped with excitement over baby names, nursery decorations, and family plans. Helen, on the other hand, had no eager father-to-be to share her updates with. She felt like an outsider, smiling politely at the discussions and occasionally fabricating reasons why Adam couldn't attend. One day, after a particularly lonely prenatal appointment, Helen found herself standing in the hospital corridor, her eyes drawn to a young couple leaving the ultrasound room. The husband draped an arm around his wife, whispering to her in excitement, pointing at the ultrasound images. Helen's eyes misted. In that moment, she realized just how much she yearned for Adam's warmth and support. The staff at the Blackwood mansion noticed that her radiant pregnancy glow was tinged with sadness. Maria, the gentle maid, tried to coax her into conversation, leaving trays of fresh fruit and herbal teas at her bedside. Helen appreciated these small kindnesses, even if they couldn't fill the chasm left by Adam's absence. Whenever Adam did appear at the mansion, it was usually late at night. Helen would hear the heavy thud of the front doors, followed by muffled phone calls in his private study. She would lie awake in bed, pressing her palm over her belly, hoping Adam would at least come to check on her. But he never did. The distance between them grew so vast that even the simplest conversation felt forced. Eventually, Helen's father, Michael Lockhart, visited the mansion to check on the carefully orchestrated arrangement he had engineered. Upon seeing his daughter's drawn expression, he questioned her well-being in a tone that sounded more like a formality than genuine concern. Helen forced a smile. She told him that she was fine, that Adam was busy building a legacy. Michael patted her hand and said, "You must understand, dear. You have to make sacrifices to be part of something grand." His words stung more than he realized, but Helen would have traded all the grandeur in the world for just a moment of genuine connection. As her due date approached, Adam's schedule became even more frantic. He was finalizing a major acquisition in London, rumored to be worth billions. It involved merging two large conglomerates, Blackwood Industries and an international energy company. The press buzzed with speculation, praising Adam's business savvy. Meanwhile, Helen quietly packed a hospital bag and pinned a note to the mansion's bulletin board in case she went into labor while Adam was halfway across the globe. Sure enough, the night her water broke, Adam was in London. Helen was rushed to the hospital by the mansion's driver and Maria. As the contractions ripped through her, she reached for her phone, tears streaming down her cheeks, trying to call Adam. No response. 12 hours of labor later, a baby girl entered the world, Evelyn Rose Blackwood. Helen clung to her newborn, overwhelmed by both love and sorrow. She had never felt so complete and yet so heartbreakingly alone. She stroked Evelyn's soft cheeks, tears spilling onto the swaddle. "It's you and me, sweet girl," she whispered. Adam arrived at the hospital the next day with a neat bouquet of lilies in hand. There was no rush of excitement on his face, just a neutral congratulations before he slipped out to manage a flood of emails from the London deal. He returned briefly to sign the birth certificate, ensuring the legalities were in order. Helen watched him from her hospital bed, rocking Evelyn against her chest. A hollow ache expanded in her heart, echoing, "He barely knows the miracle he's holding in his arms." That moment crystallized her reality. Adam might always prioritize business deals over the delicate bond of family. Still, she clung to a shred of hope that seeing Evelyn grow would soften him. Perhaps fatherhood would bring out the gentle side she'd caught glimpses of when they first married. In the following weeks, cameras snapped pictures of Adam leaving the hospital with Helen and Evelyn, a fleeting display of paternal responsibility. The headlines read, "Power couple welcomes baby Blackwood," but Helen knew that behind the tabloid's rosy portrayal lurked cold neglect. The grand Blackwood mansion had never felt lonelier, even with a newborn baby in her arms. Months melted into years, and the Blackwood empire soared to greater heights. High-rise projects in Manhattan, partnerships with global technology firms, philanthropic endeavors that landed Adam's face on the covers of esteemed magazines, all these achievements became part of Adam's unstoppable momentum. Meanwhile, Helen settled into a routine that revolved around Evelyn. From the moment Evelyn learned to crawl, Helen became her entire world. Morning cuddles, bedtime stories, finger-painting sessions, Helen poured all her unspent love into her daughter. By the time Evelyn turned 3, she was inquisitive, bright, and the spitting image of her mother. Her big brown eyes sparkled with curiosity, and her laughter could brighten any corner of the mansion. Adam's role in Evelyn's life was transient at best. He'd appear for a day or two, present a lavish gift, then vanish for weeks to broker deals. The staff, once uncertain of how to treat Helen, grew to admire her unwavering devotion to Evelyn. Maria remained a comforting presence, often stepping in as a surrogate grandmother figure, especially on days when Helen felt especially isolated. But the emotional toll weighed heavily on Helen. She was only in her late 20s, yet felt as though her life had shriveled into a single identity, caretaker of Evelyn. The grand parties and galas Adam occasionally dragged her to became events where she wore elegant dresses and plastered on a polite smile, only to return home and still feel unnoticed. Journalists painted her as a perfect, high-society wife, but none of them saw the ache in her eyes. Evelyn's questions grew more complicated with time. "Where's Daddy?" she'd ask while painting pictures of a family with bright crayons. Helen tried to offer gentle answers. "He's traveling for work, sweetie. He'll come home soon." Sometimes Evelyn would accept it. Other times she'd frown, insisting, "But I want him here, Mum." When Evelyn turned 5, Helen planned a small party in the lush garden behind the mansion. Clowns, colourful balloons, a 3-tiered cake, and a handful of Evelyn's friends from preschool. The only thing missing was Adam, who had promised to cut his meeting short but never arrived. Helen tried her best to keep the festivities joyous. Still, after the guests left and Evelyn went to bed, Helen stood alone, deflating balloons one by one, tears rolling down her cheeks. By the time Evelyn was 7, she had grown more perceptive. She noticed Adam's absence as more than just work trips. She once asked Helen directly, "Does Daddy love me?" The question stung like a blade. Helen knelt down and enveloped Evelyn in a hug. "Of course he does, my darling," she replied, though her heart twisted with doubt. Around that same time, rumors began circulating in Boston's elite circles. Words like neglect, loneliness, and troubled marriage bubbled beneath the surface. Some speculated that Adam was busy with discreet affairs. Others suggested Helen was quietly building a case for divorce. The tabloids, always eager for a scandal, sniffed around for any scrap of gossip, but found only glimpses of a young mother quietly raising her child while her millionaire husband conquered new markets. Helen's father, Michael Lockhart, had passed away 2 years prior, leaving her with a strange mix of grief and relief. He was no longer around to remind her that this was the life you signed up for. But even in death, the arrangement he orchestrated continued to define her existence. Despite it all, Helen stayed for Evelyn's sake, for her own uncertain sense of duty, and perhaps for a lingering hope that Adam would one day realize the family he'd built was more valuable than any corporate empire. Over these 7 years, her resilience grew. She learned to handle heartbreak like second nature, burying each disappointment deep inside a fortressed heart. But destiny had other plans. One innocuous act, someone sending her flowers, would soon topple the fragile equilibrium of the Blackwood household. The storm brewing on the horizon would force Helen and even Adam to confront choices they'd long avoided. Helen often found solace in her art during Evelyn's school hours. Painting was a passion she had abandoned after marrying Adam, but now it became a vital lifeline. Tucked away in a corner of the mansion's sprawling property was an old greenhouse. Long unused, it was filled with cracked pots and forgotten gardening tools. Helen transformed it into her personal studio, an airy space where sunlight streamed through dusty glass panes onto her easel. One crisp autumn morning, Helen was lost in the swirl of blues and purples on her canvas, capturing the memory of the ocean waves she loved as a child. She didn't notice the footsteps until Maria gently touched her shoulder. "There's a delivery for you, Mrs. Blackwood," Maria said with a faint smile. Helen followed Maria back into the main house, her curiosity piqued. There, on the gleaming marble floor of the foyer, stood a colossal bouquet of red and white roses bound with a satin ribbon. The scent was intoxicating, a mix of sweet romance and fresh morning dew. Atop a small card stuck between the stems, Helen read a name she recognized, Daniel Harrington. The name sent a quiver through her. Daniel was an art dealer she had met at a charity function 6 months prior. They'd had a brief but engaging conversation about Helen's love for painting. Daniel had been sincere, praising her artistic instincts, and he even encouraged her to consider showcasing her work at local galleries. Nothing about their meeting suggested more than casual politeness, at least not to her. So why the extravagant flowers? Helen's heartbeat skittered as she opened the card. "Helen, just a small reminder of how inspiring your talent is. I hope you'll consider sharing your art with the world." Daniel Harrington, her cheeks warmed. Sharing your art with the world. She recalled how Daniel had admired her sketches that evening at the function and how she had modestly dismissed them as mere hobbies. She had never expected him to remember, let alone send her such a lavish bouquet. The weight of the roses made the vase wobble slightly on the table. Helen felt a sudden swirl of emotions, flattery, confusion, and a hint of fear. Would Adam see these? What would he think? Then she laughed at herself for that thought. When was the last time Adam even noticed the color of the drapes, let alone flowers on a table? She decided to place the bouquet in the sunroom, a beautiful nook overlooking the expansive gardens, where Evelyn often did her homework. At least she could enjoy the roses' scent and color in private without having to explain them to Adam if he even cared enough to ask. Yet fate had other ideas. That very evening, in an unusual twist, Adam walked through the doors around dinner time. He claimed he was in town for a pressing board meeting the following morning, so he planned to stay overnight. Helen tried to quell the panic rising in her chest. She busied herself with ensuring dinner was prepared, instructing the chef on Evelyn's favorite chicken dish, and checking on the staff's tasks. After dinner, as Evelyn retreated to her room to read, Adam meandered into the sunroom. Helen, who was tidying up in the adjoining hallway, heard his voice, low, sharp, and directed at one of the staff. "Where did these flowers come from? Her stomach lurched. She found him standing by the roses, brows furrowed, the card in his hand. He turned to her as she entered. "Well?" he demanded, not even masking the note of accusation in his tone. Helen swallowed. "There, from someone I met at a charity event. Daniel Harrington. He's an art dealer." She tried to keep her voice calm, though her nerves jangled. Adam's jaw twitched, eyes narrowing. "An art dealer? And he sends you this?" He waved the card in the air as though it were evidence in a high-stakes trial. Helen bristled at his implication. "He admires my artwork. That's all." Adam laughed, a harsh sound that lacked any humor. Men don't just send lavish bouquets to married women for admiring artwork. "What's going on, Helen?" A spark of anger ignited within her. 7 years of dismissal, and now he had the audacity to question her loyalty over a bouquet of roses. "I am not the one who's absent for months at a time, Adam," she snapped. "You haven't shown an ounce of interest in what I do." He slammed the card onto the table, knocking the vase slightly. "Don't turn this around. I'm talking about how it looks. The press would have a field day if they caught wind of this." Helen's heart pounded. She realized that even now, his concern was rooted more in appearance than genuine feeling. She took a step back. "Then throw them out if you like," she said quietly. She didn't have the energy to fight further. Adam stood there, breathing heavily, anger radiating from him. For a moment, she thought he might smash the vase to the floor, but he merely turned on his heel and stormed out of the sunroom, leaving her alone with the roses and 1,000 confused thoughts swirling in her mind. She couldn't help the flicker of irony. For the first time in 7 years, Adam actually cared enough to confront her about something. Yet it was jealousy, not affection, that fueled him. Little did she know this was just the beginning of a storm that would unravel every fragile thread holding their marriage together. The days following the flower incident were fraught with tension. Adam stayed in Boston longer than usual, citing urgent business at his local headquarters. Helen wasn't naive. She suspected that the real reason was to keep tabs on her. Whenever she walked through the mansion, she felt his eyes on her, cold and calculating, as though he was searching for incriminating evidence of her infidelity. In truth, Helen's only wrongdoing was receiving flowers from Daniel Harrington, a man who had shown her more genuine interest in a single bouquet than Adam had in years of marriage. She found the entire situation both infuriating and heartbreakingly sad. Evelyn picked up on the tension. She noticed the hushed arguments, the clipped tone her father used whenever he addressed her mother. One night, she knocked on Helen's bedroom door. "Mom?" she said softly, her eyes worried. "Is Daddy mad at you?" Helen forced a reassuring smile and tucked Evelyn's hair behind her ear. "He's just stressed from work," she answered, giving her daughter a gentle hug. "It's grown-up problems. It'll be okay." Yet Helen herself wasn't convinced it would be okay. After Evelyn went to sleep, Helen retreated to her art studio in the old greenhouse. She spent hours painting stormy skies, each brushstroke reflecting the turbulence in her heart. Meanwhile, Adam expanded his attempts to reassert control. He arranged a sit-down meeting with Helen in his study. She agreed, hoping for some rational discussion. Instead, she found him standing behind his massive desk, arms crossed, face impassive. "I've spoken to our PR team," he began in a measured tone. "They suggest we make a few public appearances as a family. There have been rumors floating around about our marriage, and these flowers only stoke the fire." Helen's mouth went dry. "Public appearances? So you're worried about your image?" He ignored her pointed question. "They think a series of charity galas and joint interviews will dispel the gossip. I've scheduled us for the Boston Arts Benefit next week." The Boston Arts Benefit was a prestigious event, one that ironically supported emerging artists and event. Helen would have loved under different circumstances. She stared at him, incredulous. You're going to parade me around to prove we're the perfect couple? Haven't we done enough of that for 7 years? His jaw clenched. If you have a better solution, I'm listening. But I won't let my brand suffer because of some cheap rumor. Helen felt anger surge up her throat. Our marriage isn't a brand, Adam. It's supposed to be a relationship. And if it's failing, maybe we should address it privately instead of orchestrating some PR circus. He took a step toward her, eyes flaring. I said, I'm listening. Do you want to divorce, Helen? Is that what you're after? The word divorce hung in the air like a thunderclap. Helen's breath caught. She'd thought about it 1,000 times over the years, but she wasn't prepared for the question to hit her so squarely. Was that what she wanted? She exhaled slowly, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. That's not what I said, she replied softly. Then you'll attend these events with me, he stated, returning to his desk. The conversation was over. He picked up a set of documents and began flipping through them as though she'd vanished. For the rest of the week, Helen moved through the mansion as if on autopilot, her mind swirling with confusion. She reached out to an old friend, Teresa Lee, someone she'd known before her marriage, who had quietly remained in her life. Over a hushed phone call, Helen poured her heart out, recounting the years of neglect and Adam's sudden fury over the flowers. Teresa responded with gentle concern. Do you love him? She asked. Helen fell silent, tears slipping down her cheeks. The answer to that question was more complicated than she wanted to admit. I don't know, she finally whispered. Sometimes I wonder if I ever did, or if I just loved the idea of him. Though the conversation brought a flicker of relief, it also underscored a harsh truth. She was stuck in a marriage that neither partner truly nurtured. The upcoming Boston Arts benefit felt like a test she had neither the energy nor the will to pass, but it was happening regardless. As the day of the gala loomed, Helen braced herself for a stage performance, one where she'd have to hold Adam's arm, smile for cameras, and pretend that her life was a fairy tale rather than a cautionary story. The cracks in their facade were growing wider by the day, and everyone in their orbit could sense that something was about to give. The Boston Arts Benefit was held at the historic Grafton Hall, an ornate venue with marble pillars, gilded ceilings, and immaculate parquet floors. Helen arrived with Adam and Evelyn, stepping out of a sleek black limousine into a sea of flashing cameras. Adam gripped her hand, guiding her firmly. She forced a smile, mindful of the paparazzi snapping pictures and the society columnists scribbling notes on who wore what. Inside, live classical music set a refined tone. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Elegant couples mingled near the silent auction tables, sipping champagne and complimenting each other's designer attire. Helen wore a flowing emerald gown that accentuated her slender figure. A handful of people told her she looked radiant. She thanked them politely, though she felt like she was suffocating beneath a mask. Evelyn, dressed in a dainty white dress, clung to Helen's side, wide-eyed at the dazzling spectacle. Occasionally, a sponsor or patron would lean down to compliment Evelyn, who managed a shy smile. Adam, ever the businessman, excused himself to speak with potential investors and philanthropic allies, leaving Helen to float among the crowd, cradling a flute of sparkling cider instead of champagne. Then, amidst the swirl of guests, Helen spotted a familiar face, Daniel Harrington. He stood near a display of paintings, conversing with an older gentleman. When he saw Helen, his face brightened. Helen felt her heart skip. She glanced around nervously, worried about Adam's reaction if he saw them together. But curiosity and a sense of gratitude drew her forward. "Daniel," she greeted softly. "Your flowers were unexpected." He smiled warmly. "I meant every word. You have a gift, Helen, and I won't stop nudging you until the world sees your art." She blushed, remembering how Adam had raged about that bouquet. "I appreciate it," she managed, her voice tremulous. "It's just complicated." Daniel's eyes flickered with concern. Before he could respond, Evelyn tugged at Helen's gown. "Mom, can we see the paintings?" Helen nodded and led Evelyn closer to the exhibit, Daniel walking beside them. Each canvas they passed featured a local artist's work, curated by the Benefits Committee. Vibrant cityscapes, abstract pieces bursting with color. Evelyn's eyes sparkled with wonder. Daniel gently leaned down. "Which painting do you like best?" Evelyn pointed at a whimsical depiction of a city skyline overrun by giant flowers. "That one. The flowers are bigger than the buildings." Daniel grinned. "They are indeed. Would you believe it's by a first-time exhibitor?" He looked at Helen, his voice lowering. "You could be here too, showing your work." Helen swallowed, touched by his belief in her. For a moment, she felt a surge of inspiration, an ache for something beyond the gilded confines of the Blackwood mansion. Then, as if on cue, Adam materialized at her side, his face thunderous. "Evelyn, why don't you go over to the table and get some water?" Adam said, his tone deceptively pleasant. Evelyn looked to Helen, who offered a reassuring nod and trotted away. The moment she was out of earshot, Adam turned his gaze upon Daniel. "You must be Daniel Harrington," Adam said, voice laced with a brittle civility. He didn't extend his hand. Daniel returned the tense greeting, politely offering a handshake that Adam ignored. An uncomfortable silence settled before Adam spoke again, turning to Helen. "I need a word with you. Alone." Helen's cheeks burned. She glanced apologetically at Daniel, then followed Adam to a secluded alcove near the venue's grand staircase. Once out of earshot, Adam rounded on her. "I told you to keep your distance from him," he hissed. Helen bristled. "You told me no such thing." "And he just said hello." Adam's eyes flared with jealousy. "Stop lying. It's obvious you've been in contact." "Those damned flowers, Adam. We're at a charity event." "He's an art dealer. Of course he's here. Don't make a scene," Helen pleaded, feeling her pulse spike. She looked over her shoulder, worried that someone might overhear. The last thing she wanted was more fodder for the rumor mill. Adam seemed on the brink of losing control. His hand tightened around her wrist. "I won't be humiliated," he growled. "Not by you. Not by anyone." He paused, glancing at the throng of elegant guests. "We will leave this event together as a family. And we won't discuss this again." His tone was final, as though he had declared a corporate edict. Helen's eyes stung with tears. She felt humiliated, cornered, and furious. Yet she knew confronting Adam publicly could spiral into a spectacle. With trembling composure, she nodded. "Fine," she whispered. They returned to the main hall, forcing counterfeit smiles for the cameras. Helen's stomach churned. She felt Daniel's gaze from across the room, and her heart twisted with conflicting emotions, gratitude for his kindness, fear of Adam's wrath, and a gnawing longing for a life where she wasn't merely an accessory to her husband's reputation. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Adam maintained a steely composure, fielding questions from donors, while Helen clutched Evelyn's hand like a lifeline. She smiled at the right people, made small talk about the benefits mission, but her mind was miles away, replaying the ugly confrontation in the alcove, worried about what might happen once they were home. When the limo finally pulled away from Grafton Hall, Helen peered out at the city lights, her reflection ghostly in the window. She felt trapped, suffocating under Adam's growing paranoia. A single bouquet of flowers had laid bare the truth she'd been denying for years. Her marriage was built on a fragile foundation, and storms were never gentle with fragile things. Tensions only escalated after the gala. Adam's behavior became increasingly erratic. He demanded to see Helen's phone, rummaged through her emails and text messages, and interrogated her about any contact she might have with Daniel. She held back the truth that she had texted him once. simply to thank him for the flowers and explain she couldn't accept further gestures. It was a brief, innocent exchange, yet Adam acted as though he'd discovered a grand conspiracy. Helen found herself walking on eggshells, acutely aware of Adam's simmering fury. Even Evelyn sensed the shift in the household's atmosphere. The little girl clung closer to Helen, watching with worried eyes whenever Adam's voice rose in anger. In a rare display of honesty, Maria the maid approached Helen one afternoon in the hallway. "Miss S. Blackwood," she began hesitantly. "I've seen Mr. Blackwood upset before, but never like this." Her eyes shone with concern. "Is there anything I can do?" Helen's throat tightened. The staff had always kept a respectful distance, rarely prying into personal matters. But Maria's warmth compelled her to whisper, "I just need you to watch over Evelyn. Make sure she feels safe when I can't be there." Maria gently squeezed Helen's hand. "I will," she promised. Meanwhile, bits and pieces of Adam's own secrets began to float to the surface. Helen discovered them accidentally. One evening, Adam left a stack of documents in the living room. As Helen cleared the space, a folder labeled Property Holdings, San Francisco, slipped open. Inside were references to a luxury apartment rented under Adam's name, along with receipts for flights that Helen knew nothing about. She stared at the papers, her heart pounding. Could Adam have another life out there, a mistress, or someone else he'd kept hidden? The possibility gnawed at her. She recalled a rumor she'd once overheard at a charity luncheon, someone mentioning Adam's associate in California. At the time, she brushed it off. Now, doubt festered, mixing with her own sense of betrayal. When she confronted Adam about the San Francisco apartment, he brushed it off as company property for visiting clients. But his evasive tone and the way his eyes shifted told her he was lying. They fought late into the night, bitterness bleeding from each word. Adam accused Helen of hypocrisy. "You're pointing fingers at me when you're the one entertaining some art dealer." And she retorted that at least her conscience was clean. During this tumultuous stretch, a single bright spot emerged. Evelyn began taking an interest in painting, spending hours with Helen in the greenhouse-turned-studio, experimenting with brushes and watercolors. There, away from Adam's rants, mother and daughter found a fragile peace. Helen shared basic techniques, taught Evelyn about mixing colors, and told her stories of her own dreams of being an artist. Evelyn's laughter in that little greenhouse was a balm to Helen's battered spirit. Yet each day, returning to the mansion's main quarters felt like stepping back into a battlefield. The tension reached a fever pitch when Adam discovered that Daniel Harrington had emailed Helen a flyer for an upcoming art showcase, inviting her to display her work. It was a cordial, group invitation extended to multiple local artists, but Adam seized on it as proof of some illicit bond. "How dare he keep contacting you?" Adam snarled, slamming Helen's phone onto a table. The screen cracked from the force. She trembled, torn between fear and anger. "He's not contacting me personally, Adam. It's a group email. And even if he did, you have no right." Adam loomed over her, fists clenched. "I have every right. I am your husband." His voice dripped with a toxic blend of entitlement and fury. Helen's stomach churned. In that moment, something inside her snapped. She recognized a glimmer of danger in Adam's eyes, a controlling edge she'd never fully grasped before. If she continued to yield, she risked becoming a prisoner in more than just name. That night, while Adam slept, Helen quietly gathered her phone, the cracked screen flickering, and emailed Daniel back from her laptop, briefly explaining she appreciated the invite but could not participate. Then she opened a blank document and typed out another email, this one to a divorce attorney recommended by her friend Teresa Lee. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a long moment. Despite everything, fear clenched her heart. Adam was wealthy, powerful, and capable of making her life a legal battleground. But she thought of Evelyn, of the example she was setting for a bright little girl with so much potential. Could she teach her daughter to be strong and independent if she herself remained shackled to a loveless, controlling marriage? In the end, she pressed send. A quiet beep confirmed the message had been delivered. She exhaled, heart pounding as though she'd just leapt off a cliff. In many ways, she had. The stage was set for an explosive confrontation, one that would force both Helen and Adam to confront their darkest truths, whether they were ready or not. Helen's email to the divorce attorney was like lighting a fuse that couldn't be extinguished. Over the next week, she continued to correspond in secrecy, learning about her legal options, the possibility of custody arrangements, and the labyrinth of financial disclosures that a divorce from Adam Blackwood would entail. Each email felt like a tiny step toward freedom, and yet each step heightened her anxiety about what might happen if Adam discovered her plans. Amidst this backdrop, Daniel Harrington dropped off a small package at the Blackwood mansion. It arrived while Adam was away, but ironically, it was Evelyn who found the box in the foyer. The label read Aton, Helen Blackwood. Opening it, Helen discovered a hardcover art book featuring modern impressionist paintings, along with a handwritten note. Helen, hoping this inspires you to keep painting, no matter what. Daniel, for a moment, warmth spread through her chest. Daniel's gesture was modest yet heartfelt, another reminder that he believed in her talent. But that warmth quickly turned to dread. If Adam found out about this package, it would only fuel his suspicions. She hid the book in her greenhouse studio, deciding not to mention it to anyone, even Maria. Later that evening, fate threw a brutal curveball. Adam arrived home unexpectedly, citing a cancelled flight for a supposed business trip. He looked tense, scanning the house as though searching for something out of place. When he cornered Helen in the living room, she braced herself for another argument. "I had a talk with your father's old friend, Howard Millstone, the attorney," Adam began in a tight voice. "He mentioned you've been making inquiries about." He paused for emphasis, eyebrows raised. "Divorce." Helen's blood ran cold. She'd never spoken to Howard about her situation, but evidently word had spread. Perhaps her father's associates were still keeping tabs on her. I haven't decided anything yet," she managed. "So it's true," Adam said, voice rough. "You're leaving me." Helen swallowed hard. "Adam, we can't go on like this. We both know that." He snatched a glass from a nearby side table and flung it against the wall. It shattered, shards scattering across the floor. Helen jumped back with a gasp. "Do you think you can just walk away with Evelyn?" His voice cracked with fury. "You're not taking my daughter from me." Trembling, Helen squared her shoulders. "You left us years ago, Adam. You're here in body sometimes, but never in heart. Evelyn barely knows you beyond the gifts and broken promises." He seized her wrist in a bruising grip. "And you think Harrington is any better? Is that what this is about?" Helen wrenched herself free, tears stinging her eyes. "This isn't about Daniel or anyone else. It's about me realizing I deserve more than living in your shadow." A bitter laugh escaped him. "More than the endless wealth I've provided, the mansion you live in, the staff at your beck and call." His face contorted with disbelief. "It's not a home, Adam. It's a prison," Helen snapped, her voice finally brimming with a fury she'd suppressed for years. "If you cared about our marriage, about Evelyn, you would have been here before now. You'd know her favorite color, her silly jokes, the way her eyes light up when she's painting. Instead, you only show up to control, to threaten." Adam's face darkened. For an instant, Helen wondered if he might strike her. Instead, he stepped back and exhaled a ragged breath. "If you go through with this," he whispered, "I will destroy you. Financially, socially, whatever it takes. You'll be left with nothing. Do you understand?" The menace in his tone made Helen's skin crawl. She took a trembling breath, tears finally overflowing. "If you think that scares me more than living like this for the rest of my life, you're wrong." As soon as the words left her mouth, she felt a surge of terrified liberation. She had challenged him outright. Adam's eyes flickered with a complex mix of anger and something close to regret. Without another word, he stormed out of the living room, leaving Helen slumped against the couch. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her temples. She looked at the shattered glass on the floor and silently prayed that Evelyn hadn't witnessed any part of the fight. Over the next several hours, the mansion fell into a suffocating silence. Helen retreated to her bedroom, locked the door, and scrolled through her phone until she found the number for Teresa Lee. She needed a friend's voice, some anchor to steady her. When Teresa picked up, Helen's composure broke. She relayed the confrontation, the shattered glass, Adam's threat. Teresa's voice was calm but urgent. "Helen, you need to get out of there, at least temporarily. You and Evelyn. Adam's threat isn't something to take lightly." Helen trembled. "But how? He's watching my every move." "I'll help," Teresa insisted. "Pack enough for a few days. I'll organize a place for you. Just call me when you're ready." Helen nodded, tears trailing down her face. She could almost hear her heartbeat echoing in her ears. For the first time, she fully understood how high the stakes had become. Adam's wealth and power gave him immense leverage against which she had her love for Evelyn, her will to protect her daughter, and a faint but growing courage to reclaim her own life. The fuse that had been lit now burned dangerously close to the powder keg. A single spark could tear everything apart. Over the next 2 days, Helen orchestrated her departure with quiet determination. She packed a small suitcase for herself and Evelyn, choosing items carefully so as not to raise suspicions. Maria discreetly offered her help, slipping Helen extra food and comforting words, promising to keep secrets if Adam questioned her. Adam, for his part, was consumed by damage control. Helen overheard phone calls in which he barked orders at attorneys, discussing strategies and finding leverage. She dreaded what that might entail. Bank accounts? Custody claims? She wasn't sure, but she sensed that once Adam fully realized her intentions, he'd move swiftly to trap her financially. One evening, as the household staff began winding down, Helen crept to Evelyn's room. She gently stirred her daughter awake and whispered, "We need to go, sweetheart. We're visiting Aunt Teresa for a few days. It's a surprise." Evelyn blinked sleepily, but Helen's urgency must have registered. She nodded, trusting her mother without question. They moved softly down the stairs, each footstep echoing in Helen's ears. Her heart raced as she pictured Adam discovering them mid-escape, but he was shut away in his study, presumably on another call. By the time they reached the front door, Maria was there, offering a trembling smile. "Go quickly," she said, pressing a small brown envelope into Helen's hand. "Some money I've saved, just in case." Helen's eyes welled up. She hugged Maria briefly, then slipped out into the cool night air with Evelyn in tow. A hired car waited at the end of the driveway, Teresa's arrangement. They drove off, the mansion's grand silhouette receding in the rearview mirror. When they arrived at Teresa's condominium, Helen felt a wave of relief. Teresa opened the door, immediately pulling them both into tight embraces. "I'm so glad you're safe," she murmured, guiding them inside. The condo was warm and modest compared to the opulent mansion, but it felt more like home than anywhere Helen had known in years. Evelyn settled into a spare bedroom, lulled by Teresa's promise of hot chocolate in the morning. Once her daughter was asleep, Helen collapsed on the living room couch. The enormity of her actions leaving Adam, risking his wrath, hit her like a tidal wave. She tried to hold back tears, but they came in full force. Teresa sat beside her, rubbing her back. "You did the right thing," she whispered. "You couldn't stay there anymore." Helen nodded, wiping her eyes. "But what now? He'll come after me. He'll try to destroy me in court. Teresa's gaze was firm. That's why we'll get you proper representation. I know a family lawyer, Lauren Stevens. She's handled high-profile cases. She can help you navigate this. Thus began a whirlwind of legal consultations. Within days, Helen found herself sitting in Lauren Stevens' tidy office, signing documents that would officially begin divorce proceedings. Evelyn remained in the condo with Teresa, blissfully unaware of the heavy drama unfolding. As Helen relayed the years of neglect, the final confrontation, and her fears for Evelyn's emotional well-being, Lauren listened carefully. Given his threats and your testimony, I believe we can file for a protective order if necessary, she said, her voice calm and professional. Helen's stomach twisted at the word protective order, but she nodded in acquiescence. Sure enough, Adam wasted no time retaliating. A courier arrived at Teresa's condo one morning, delivering a thick envelope of legal documents. It contained a motion from Adam's lawyers, claiming that Helen Blackwood had abandoned the marital home, potentially endangering the child's stability. They sought primary custody for Adam on the grounds that Helen was unfit to provide the lavish lifestyle. Evelyn was accustomed to. Helen's hands shook as she read the documents. Teresa took them from her, scanning the pages with a frown. "He's twisting everything," Teresa murmured. "We knew he would." The next blow came when the press got wind of the separation. Tabloid headlines screamed, "Art dealer at center of Blackwood divorce," with speculation running rampant about an affair between Helen and Daniel Harrington. Paparazzi staked out the entrance to Teresa's condo, hoping to snap a photo of Helen or Evelyn. Helen felt her world tilt on its axis. She'd gone from invisible trophy wife to the subject of gossip column fodder practically overnight, and yet a strange sense of liberation lingered beneath her panic. For the first time, she was steering her own fate rather than letting Adam dictate every turn. Daniel Harrington, having caught wind of the rumors, sent Helen a text. "I'm sorry if my gesture caused complications. If you need help in any way, I'm here," she replied with gratitude, but she was wary of fueling the scandal further. She had enough on her plate without adding romantic rumors to the mix. Day by day, the legal battle escalated. Adam's team pressed for immediate custody hearings. Helen's attorney countered with evidence of Adam's chronic absence. They unearthed emails, schedule logs, even the suspicious San Francisco apartment records. The confrontation was no longer confined to the mansion it had burst into courtrooms and front-page news. But one thing remained unwavering: Helen's resolve to protect Evelyn. Every step she took, every strategy meeting with Lauren, every heartbreak she endured, she did it so that her daughter could grow up free from the silent despair that had choked Helen's own life for 7 years. A final, dramatic hearing loomed on the horizon, one that would determine the immediate custody arrangement. Everything Helen had endured, every sacrifice she'd made, would be judged by a single figure in a courtroom. She braced herself for the reckoning, praying she had enough strength left to fight for the life she and Evelyn deserved. The courthouse was a stark, imposing building of grey stone, its steps lined with reporters eager for a sensational story. Helen's heart pounded as she emerged from Teresa's car, clutching Evelyn's hand. She had contemplated leaving Evelyn at the condo, but Lauren advised it could help the judge see how mother and daughter interacted. Paparazzi lights flashed, and questions pelted her like hailstones, but she pressed forward, guided by Teresa on one side and her lawyer Lauren on the other. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Adam sat at one table with his formidable legal team, exuding an air of unflappable confidence. Helen took her seat with Lauren, feeling small but resolute. They were here for a preliminary custody, hearing a chance for each side to present arguments regarding Evelyn's immediate future. Adam's attorney launched the first salvo, painting a portrait of Helen as a flighty mother who walked out on a stable home and possibly engaged in inappropriate behavior with an outside party, alluding to Daniel Harrington, of course. They cited the tabloids as evidence. As they droned on, Helen's stomach twisted in outrage. She kept glancing at Evelyn, seated quietly next to Teresa, her big eyes taking in the solemn setting. Then it was Lauren's turn. She spoke with calm clarity, outlining Adam's consistent neglect, his extended absences, his dismissive attitude toward Helen's pregnancy, his recorded threats. She presented logs of Adam's travels, highlighting how rarely he'd been home for Evelyn's milestones. Crucially, she introduced the documentation about Adam's secret apartment in San Francisco, implying potential infidelity and hidden finances. Helen felt her pulse throb as each piece of evidence was laid out. She remembered the day Evelyn was born, and Adam had shown up too late to witness her arrival. She recalled the heartbreak of Evelyn's birthdays, spent waiting in vain. All of it poured into the courtroom under the glaring lights. When Adam took the stand, he spoke of his unyielding devotion to providing for his family. "I sacrificed my time to build an empire that Helen and Evelyn enjoy," he said, voice rich with self-assurance. "I love my daughter, and I won't be denied the chance to raise her properly." His eyes flickered toward Helen, a warning in their depths. Helen's turn came next. She described life at the mansion, lonely dinners, empty seats at recitals, the emotional toll of a father who was physically and emotionally absent. Tears slid down her cheeks as she recalled the night she left, how fear and desperation gripped her. "I want what's best for Evelyn," she said, voice trembling. "And what's best is an environment filled with genuine love and presence, not just wealth." Throughout her testimony, Evelyn watched quietly. At one point, the judge asked if the child wanted to say anything. Evelyn spoke shyly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love Mommy and Daddy. But Daddy is always gone. I want to be with Mommy." A hush fell over the courtroom. Adam's expression hardened, but he couldn't deny the raw honesty of his daughter's words. The judge excused Evelyn shortly thereafter, motioning for the bailiff to escort her outside. Closing arguments ensued, thick with tension. Finally, the judge recessed for a half hour to review the materials. Helen huddled with Teresa in a waiting area, tears threatening to spill. Adam paced the halls, speaking sternly into his phone. The outcome felt uncertain. Adam's money and influence were formidable weapons. When the judge returned, everyone rose. In a measured tone, he delivered his ruling. Temporary custody would be granted to Helen, with Adam allotted scheduled visitation rights. A thorough investigation into finances, potential infidelity, and paternal fitness would proceed in the coming months before a permanent custody arrangement was finalized. Helen's knees went weak with relief. She barely registered the rest of the judge's instructions. Evelyn ran to her, wrapping her arms around her waist. They hugged, tears glistening in Helen's eyes. Adam's face was a mask of fury and disbelief. Even so, he managed a tight-lipped statement to the press outside the courtroom, vowing to fight for full custody. But his threats carried less weight now. The court had acknowledged Helen's role as Evelyn's primary caregiver. For the first time in what felt like eternity, Helen walked out of the courthouse with her daughter's hand in hers, head held high. The bright glare of paparazzi cameras no longer daunted her. Teresa ushered them into the car, and as it sped away, Helen gazed at the city skyline with a sense of cautious optimism. That evening, they returned to Teresa's condo. Daniel Harrington emailed Helen, congratulating her on the outcome and reminding her that his offer to help her showcase her art still stood. She read his message with a trembling smile. The possibility of a new beginning, one defined by her own talents and freedom, seemed closer than ever. The road ahead was far from easy. There would be more hearings, more battles over assets and custody, more attempts by Adam to sabotage her. But Helen felt a spark of resilience she hadn't known she possessed. She had fought for her child and for herself, and she had won the first crucial victory. In the quiet of Teresa's living room, Evelyn fell asleep on Helen's lap, secure in the knowledge that her mother was there to protect her. Helen stroked her daughter's hair, heart brimming with gratefulness and resolve. Outside, the night sky stretched wide and dark, but in Helen's mind, a new dawn was already breaking, one filled with the promise of real love, honest connections, and the glorious, unbounded freedom to be who she was always meant to be. Helen's story isn't just about a marriage gone wrong. It's about the quiet, relentless strength within us all. For 7 years, she was sidelined in her own life while her millionaire husband, Adam, chased power and prestige. Only when a rival's simple gesture flowers threatened his ego did he finally turn his attention back to her. It wasn't love or remorse, but jealousy that laid bare the ugly truth of their marriage. Yet from that turmoil, Helen discovered her courage. She took a stand, fought a daunting legal battle, and forged a new path for herself and her daughter, Evelyn. Through it all, she learned that true wealth isn't about mansions or bank balances. It's about love, dignity, and hope for the future. Thank you for experiencing Helen's emotional journey. If you found her story inspiring or heartrending, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more riveting stories of resilience and triumph.